It's entitled Report of Accountability Concerns Indiana Department of Education. It was sent to you in advance. It was in your agenda originally sent out.
It's in the agenda under 1112. Okay.
Making sure everybody has it.
Certainly, it was a hyperlink in the agenda.
Correct. Did everybody find it? I think we still have a couple looking. It was a hyperlink right within the agenda. Sure. Thanks, Deb, for altering your presentation.
No problem.
What is it labeled under the agenda?
It should have been under 1112 accountability. AF accountability, board decision regarding 1112 grade calculations.
Action item BA.
Yes. What we're going to do is address the high schools first, so just scroll down a little bit. The removal of the high school category caps was the first issue that Michelle talked about. And so, Michelle, why don't you walk us through the reason for bringing this to the board for decisions?
Certainly. I'm actually Debbie, but that's okay.
Go ahead. What did I say? Oh, did I say Michelle? Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry, Debbie.
No problem. I just wasn't sure
I do
if I should
know
turn it
who
over to
you
Michelle. No problem. So
Poor Michelle. She thought, what?
you'll notice in the GRU Sheldrake report, as you had an opportunity to review that, one of the recommendations for 2012 grades was to actually review the 3 high schools that were, whose grades were elevated due to the omission of the category cap or content area cap. Now, under the recommendations, they had originally stated to recalculate that. However, we've had some discussions internally as to the concept of hold schools harmless, and for these 3 schools in particular, the idea of holding them harmless would mean leave them at their grade that they were originally assigned in 2012. It has been a year. All 3 of these schools were originally assigned an A. If we do replace that category cap, all 3 of the schools would go back to a B. So those are really the 2 options that are available for these 3 high schools, is again to allow them to retain the original grade as posted, or to recalculate that grade and post it reapplying those category caps.
I think that I would, yes. I want to handle it very simply, one by one. And I guess I would also say that going forward in calculations, the cap will be in place, okay? This was an error in calculations, as GRU Sheldrake report indicated, in one area that they were focused on.
It was a judgment, and we would, if we want to remove the caps in the future, you want to leave it to the board instead of an administrative decision.
On this
Correct.
particular
No,
point,
not-
this was actually specified
No.
in rule
Right.
that there
Right.
would be category
But we
caps for
can-
high school.
No.
But you could bring it here,
These
correct?
would not be the
No.
ones that are brought forth.
It is very clear in rule on high school that it is to have the caps.
That is correct, that it is very,
Michelle, it can be brought here if we want to do this in the future too, as well.
Well, it's the elementary, and I think that the back end of our discussion on all of these is going to address those schools that
Okay.
could be brought, that don't meet, whose data profiles don't really seem to fit with what the rule envisioned.
Okay.
But these schools were high schools and had the right data profile.
Well,
Correct.
My motion would be to hold them harmless and hold to the letter grade they have and the system that was used to arrive at that.
So we have, so if you don't mind, I would like to take them separately so that we can go ahead. We've got options here for you. So it says recalculate and republish the grade, okay, and actually put the cap on, or allow the schools to retain the original grades, which I think is what you're making a motion. If you want to do that for all 3 high schools, then we'll let the motion reflect that we would like to make a motion to allow the schools, the 3 high schools, to retain the original grades calculated for 2011-12. Do I have a second? Do we have any more discussion? Yes.
Yes. In the report made by GRU and Sheldrake, didn't they recommend the first option there to recalculate and republish?
They did.
that's correct.
They did.
And I'm not sure I can support the motion in that they've made that recommendation for those 3 high schools for 2011, 2012. And I would frankly prefer to have it recalculated so that we're consistently applying the rules.
And because they made the recommendations, we're asking you to take some action regarding that. And we've given the department's rationale for bringing it to you. They've had these grades all year, and
Yeah, I respect that. I think first year of implementation and going back and changing the grade down, there's some judgments made, timelines, et cetera. And we learned a lot through the process, but it almost seems, maybe I'm using my school mentality, you gave out a test, it's a semester later, we're gonna call them up and say, you know, we've been doing a lot of moving on this. And so I think technically I agree with you. Practically, that's why I made my motion. Right?
Yeah, you know, they've studied the issue, they made the recommendation, and they've certainly spent a lot more time than I've spent reviewing the entire system. And so this may be a case where we disagree, but I'm going to rely on the experts who put in a lot of time and energy in looking at it. And I assume the recommendation they made was based on a lot of data and along with speaking to a lot of people. So.
any more discussion, Adrian?
They've received a grade since then, right?
They have the grade, all 3 of these have a grade
So
of A.
this would be retroactively going back and, okay.
Correct. Any more discussion? I'll call for the vote. Laura?
Yes.
Yes.
Did you vote, Mike?
Yes.
Gordon Henry,
Yes.
Andrew Neal,
Yes.
Sarah O'Brien,
Yes.
Brad Oliver,
Yes.
Kenny Walker,
Yes.
Steve Watt,
Yes.
Gary Wicker, Superintendent Wright.
I will be abstaining from these votes as the department, as speaking for the department. Yes, Brad?
I think you may just answer, I was just asking why you were abstaining.
Yes, I'm wanting the department not to make the policy decision, and so I'm just abstaining from voting for that reason only. I just want you guys to decide if that's okay. Thank you. I play a dual role here. So, all right, on to,
I'm okay with that as long as you express your opinion during the discussion.
no problem, and I have, and I will continue to do that.
Point of order, I just want to ask a clarifying question. Why would this decision be different than any other one coming before us where you're playing a dual role?
I asked the department to, well, no, it's not that in itself. I asked the department to gather all kinds of options for you to make, for us to make decisions. I feel that as the agency chair, as the agency head of the State Board of Education, as head of the
It's the State Department.
Department of Education, that I need to not play a role in the decision that's been made, because it's concerning rule that I actually did not partake in. And I feel more comfortable in you making those decisions instead of me. So that I'm just completely neutral. And so I asked my staff on purpose to prepare a series of options to talk with you about.
Is there any legal reason to abstain from taking a position?
Oh, no, not at all.
Because I didn't take.
It's simply my choice. It's simply my choice. It's simply my choice. All right, let's go on to the schools, the next schools. And this one's a little more complicated. So
This is.
you have before you another page that we sent to you. It looks like this. It looks like this.
Bear with me, this will actually take several slides, so I think some of the questions are answered about 3 slides from now. So schools with unusual grade configurations. Again, through the 2013 IDOE and LSA review, it has been determined IDOE policy decisions were executed to manage grades for schools with elementary middle school grade levels and partial high school levels, a subset of schools that are not addressed in administrative rule. During 2011-12 implementation, an IDOE policy decision was made to assess combined schools with partial high school data using only the elementary middle school standard model, EMS. The policy decision has been determined to be plausible by LSA review, and it was consistently applied for all schools. It was a uniform application of this rule. However, the IDOE has identified alternate plausible solutions which may result in better outcomes for schools and allows the use of high school data as available. So again, the concern here is that we are not using all data points that are available for these schools. So as we go into combined models, first let me start with an explanation of what a combined model is. I think most people are familiar, but just to kind of cover the bases here, we're really calling a combined school a school that has both elementary middle school grades as well as high school grades. The combined school grade is a weighted average of the elementary middle school score and the 4 weighted averages of the high schools. The problem is the rule requires 4 weighted scores for the high school. This is not possible for every combined school, as some of the schools do not have all 4 data elements. So for example, we get into a school that may be, 6th grade through 10th grade. This school will have ECA data, English Language Arts, and math data, but they will not have a graduation rate, and they will not have college career readiness data. So under 2012 policy decision, this would have been assessed as elementary middle school only, using only grades 3 through 8 data and ignoring any high school data associated. So as we have reviewed this, along with LSA, we're looking at alternate plausible solutions that would allow for the use of all available data. So again, you notice within the rule, the red highlighted area, that it does state when calculating a grade for a combined school that we must use the sum of the 4 weighted scores for high school. And I do want to underline that 4. That really limits us on the available models that we can use to calculate a combined school. So let's step back and take a look at all of the rules that are actually outlined, all of the models that are actually outlined in the rule. We have a list of elementary middle school models. Standard elementary middle school model, it's used for grades 3 through 8. It has 2 score components to it. Small elementary middle school, growth only model, and of course our elementary middle school feeder model. For high school, we also have a list. We have the standard high school model. We call it HS for short. It uses data from grade 10 as well as cohort information, again, graduation rate, college career readiness. So this has the 4 data points or 4 scores that's specified in rule. You'll notice the rest of the high school list: small high school model, grade 9-10 only model, grade 11-12 model, only have 2 data elements each. So this is where our trouble comes into play when we're trying to create a combined school, is many of these schools do not have all 4 of those data elements. So when we're looking at a combined school, what we're really saying is for the high school component, we can only use the standard high school model that's available. Another plausible alternative solution for combined schools is a final grade comprised of a combination of any available elementary middle school model with any available high school model. So for example, the school that we were just discussing has grades 6 through 10. We could use the last one on this list where we have a combined model using an elementary middle school component and a 9-10 only component. You'll notice that this is not referenced in rule because, again, the rule does reference that we must have all 4 scores for the high school component. This is another plausible solution. Obviously, what was reviewed by Greer and Sheldrake was deemed plausible as well. I think the advantage that we're trying to show here is the use of data that's available for these schools. So again, back to our 6-10 example, we're only using data from grades 6 through 8. We're not using any data from the high school side if we stay with elementary middle school only to assess that school.
If you could go back to
Sure.
that slide right there. So I just want to clarify.
Sure.
So we have models already approved in rule for small high school, grade 9-10 only, grade 11 and 12 only, that use just 2 data points.
Correct.
They do not have to use all 4.
Correct.
Okay? And so what you're suggesting for the board to consider at some point is that we may want to utilize these models for combined schools as an alternative to assigning them all to elementary middle, ignoring their 9th and 10th grade scores. So you're just presenting other models for them to consider.
Correct.
And now we're to the schools that we're going to talk about.
So as the Department of Education did this review with LSA, we've identified schools with an accountability, let me back up. Let me talk about overrides, what an override is, and the impact on 2012. An override is the method to handle or control system outliers. So again, the schools that we were just discussing, grades 6 through 8 grade span, how are we going to handle that? An override is a system application that's basically stating that a specific model will be used to assess a school. So instead of allowing the computer program to select based on grade spans, we're forcing it to use a specific model to assess the school. Again, the policy decision for 2012 was for all of these outliers or schools with unusual grade configurations to use elementary middle school only model. The way that was handled was using this override system, placing these schools into this override table and forcing them to use elementary middle school only. So during the review, this was brought to the attention of both Grew and Sheldrake as well, and you can see these were actually listed within their report as well and how things were applied. Again, very consistently applied that it was elementary middle school only.
May I ask you a question?
Certainly.
You put a lot of time into this, I really appreciate it. Basically, what we have is a plausible model that was equally applied. My thought would be to leave it be, keep the learning, because we're learning how to do this better every year, and then consider it as you move forward. I think moving things around again, it was plausible, equally applied. Like any teacher in here, we went on, moved on. Maybe the next semester we better designed our test and better applied. But I just like consistency.
Dan,
And
I don't
so
mean to,
that's kind of what I'm thinking.
don't mean to interrupt you, but we're not to that point yet. We're going to be talking about schools in 11, 12 and talk to you about what was assigned to them and then what the override was. And ask you to make some decisions. And then we're going to get to 12, 13 and how you would like us to go forward. I think we've given you also some configurations that are even going to crop up new for us to take care of. So let's look now. You received this paper. You all have that? Okay. And if you could, Debbie, we are looking at, you are looking at your paper that now talks about 4 schools in which we had configuration differences. You all have that, right? It's the report of accountability concerns. It's the same paper that we had that had the 3 high schools on it. And you also have this paper. And so Deb's going to just walk you through so that you completely understand what we're going to be doing here for 11, 12 in your decisions.
Sure. So the first chart with, I believe it's 17 schools, maybe off 1 or 2, looks very similar to this. Again, this is a list of schools that we identified had an override in place for 2012. This list of schools are ones that Grew Sheldrake analyzed, and so did the Department of Education. As part of this process, the Department of Education recalculated 2012 A through F grades, ignoring the overrides. In other words, we allowed the system to select which accountability model should have been used, had every possibility been applicable per rule. This is the outcome of that information. Models were automatically assigned based on the grade spans. Combined schools used any available combination of the elementary middle school components and high school components. 4 schools that received an F in 2012 would have received a higher grade or no grade using this alternate plausible solution. So this comes into play on your list of schools that were negatively impacted. I feel these schools were negatively impacted by this decision. So the first one is Career Academy at South Bend. You can see that they received an F Had they been assessed under the full model, they would have received a null or no grade.
Can I ask a question? How do you get a no grade?
No grade. So I don't have the sheet in front of me, but for each of these cases, 2 of these, I believe 3 of these were actually new schools and would fall under that category. And I believe that information is within your packet for
Yeah, it's
consideration.
within rule, it speaks to a new school and adding of a grade.
Correct. So 2 were completely new schools, and I believe 1 had just transitioned from being a non-accredited non-public to an accredited non-public, and therefore counts as a new school or year 1 school as well. Now, some of the issues we have here is within the rule, it is addressed how to handle a new elementary school, and that they have the option of selecting growth-only model or the standard elementary model. It's not addressed for high school. So that would typically default a new high school into having no grade for year 1. These are combined schools. So they have some elementary middle school grades and some high school grades. So there is really no clear path of what happens for a year 1 combined school.
Can I ask another question?
You may,
So
please.
if you're a new school, you can get a no grade. Is that, if I boil that down? is
Under
that
high
true? Or if
school.
you add a new grade, you can.
And not if you've added a new grade. These are truly new schools that have been open for 1 year.
Okay, so you
In other
can't-
words, 2012 was their first year.
You can't just add a grade level,
No.
add a 9th grade and say, now we've got a high school, so we're a new school, so we'll get a no grade. And then next year you
No.
eliminate the 9th grade and play this game.
No, but you are talking about a lot of different configurations of schools.
Right, but I just want to
Yeah.
make sure there isn't this possibility of a game being played.
No. So on the right-hand side of your paper, I just want to make sure that you understand a key point. It says auto assigned. All of these schools were originally assigned to these models because they had elementary, middle data, and they also had partial high school data. And so they were originally assigned these models. Then the override was applied consistently and using an elementary middle school only to ignore all data that was collected at the high school level. So as a result, we're presenting to you today 4 schools in which they were auto-assigned, but when the new model was applied, then their grade went down.
So I want to provide just a little bit of clarification because I was checking my own notes and I've come to know this rule quite well. But there isn't anything in the administrative regulation for combined schools or the various versions of high schools or for elementary or middle schools that states that if you are a new school, then you will not receive a grade. There are provisions for the elementary and middle schools that have been opened 3 years or less, then they get to elect between the 2 models. And then as Debbie had said, for high schools, it doesn't matter how many years you have been opened. The models apply as they're written in the rule. I just want to be clear that there isn't anything in the rule that necessarily means new school, first year you're open, this yields a null. In fact, I would argue that the rule, because it doesn't provide for that, would prohibit it because it actually tells you how to deal with most models of schools, with the exception of these.
I have a question for Michelle. Let me just be sure I understand this. Grades were initially calculated based on our current rules, is that correct? And then you ran a separate model, a separate system, and came out with a different grade. Statutorily, is that possible? Does the statute provide for an alternative way to calculate a second grade?
Well, I think, if I'm not misunderstanding your question, that's sort of the crux of what we're wrestling with right here, which is, the rule was drafted, as you are seeing, if you weren't familiar with it before, it is a very complicated rule. attempting to provide a more accurate portrayal of school performance, right? That's not an easy thing to capture, so we wound up with a very complicated rule. And in the attempt of trying to capture that, we were somewhat specific in defining different forms of schools. And with that specificity, we left, some things weren't caught, right? If you're specific, then you're not broad. And so we have these schools that were kind of in the margins. And as Debbie was very well explaining, what happens is since the models call for certain data points, what will you will sometimes have schools that, gosh, by the black and white letter of the law, it looks like they should fall under, say, the combined school model, which is usually where the issue is. But the data that the combined school model is, you know, there are 4 pieces: your English 10 ECA, your Algebra 1 ECA, college career readiness, and grad rate. And the reality is there's only the schools that go all the way up to grade 12 and have had grade 12 for 2 years will ever have all of that data. So anytime that you don't have a high school that spans 9 to 12 and has had 12 for 2 years, then you run into this scenario here where you don't have all the data that the model calls for, and because of that you might wind up with the model yielding a result that no longer necessarily captures what's happening at the school. And Debbie and I have not been working together on her presentation, and we both had some different materials we created trying to be helpful to introduce folks to this. And so what I might do as you're thinking about this is distribute something that I created. Well, I shouldn't say I created it. Those of you familiar with Emily Richardson, who's been at the department and now is the interim director at the Indiana Charter School Board, created that explains what grades different data points become available. If you're a visual person, this might be helpful as you can look through it and see exactly, if you're a school that only goes up to grade 10, the data that you have available, period. If you're a school that goes up to grade 11, these are the data. And hopefully when you look at that and then look at this information that says the columns that say low grade and high grade, it will help you figure out why these schools weren't easy fits for the grade, for the regulation.
Michelle, we want to be fair and transparent. So here's my question. If we use the alternative formula that has been proposed, or at least identified, would that be an inconsistent application of our rules?
You're asking if this was done in a consistent manner, and there were challenges with that, right, that we're talking about. It was an interpretation of how to deal with schools that did not meet the combined school model because they didn't really have all the data the combined school model calls for.
My question is, compared to the regular group, if we can call it the regular group, is this providing an advantage or disadvantage to these 4 schools, thereby creating an inconsistent application among the universe of all schools?
When you say this, you mean revisiting them?
The 4 schools, one recommendation is to use this new formula. My question is does that give this group an unfair advantage or disadvantage compared to the entire universe of all schools? It seems like we've applied a formula to every school in the state of Indiana, and then suddenly we're now creating these different models. And it seems, at least at the appearance, that there may be an inconsistent application. And my next question is going to be, why not do it for all schools? Why not run all the schools through multiple models and see which model gives them the best score? Which doesn't make any kind of sense, right?
Sure. If I can speak to
Yeah,
that.
yeah, go ahead, Debbie, I think
Sorry.
you should.
No problem. So under this concept, again, of hold schools harmless, we're looking at what would have been a better outcome. And yes, I do believe that applying this for these 4 schools could be tagged as inconsistent. However, please keep in mind as you look through this documentation that at least 2 of these schools did actually appeal the fact that they were being assessed as elementary middle school only, and they're actually asking for all of their data to be used and not part of their data. So in that essence, it, again, holds schools harmless. We're looking at the best possible outcome. We did run all of the schools and identified who actually had a better outcome under this other plausible solution.
If I could, I have some of that. Last night in the evening, we distributed, the department was kind enough to provide, and then state board staff distributed some of that appeal information. And I just wanted, I know we've really inundated everyone with lots of info, so I thought maybe I would pop that appeal information to talk about it, since we're going to reference that they did appeal.
If we could go back, if you don't mind. Michelle, what is it you're doing?
Just showing some of I'm showing the department's response letter to the appeal. Just since we're talking about that they appealed, I wanted to at least show what that appeal, the information that was provided by the school when they appealed, and then the department's response letter that explains whether or not it was granted and the rationale.
Could you wait on that for just a moment? Debbie, could you go back to a slide that talks about the high school models? Thank you. So in your rule that you have approved high school model, small high school model, a 9-10 only, 11-12 only, and a high school feeder model. Those are already in rule. What happened was, in the combined section of rule, I guess to be simplistic, it didn't include having all of these same high school models that you already approved be part of a combined model with an elementary middle. So what we're saying to you is the calculated computer pieces, assigned the schools that you have a list of to a model. And if you look on the right-hand side, it says HS, SHS, 910, 910, SHS, SHS, and it gives you all the models that you approved. And it matched that with the elementary middle, and then it calculated a grade using only 2 points of data that you had approved in your rule as a separate high school. Because we have high schools that are just 910, and we have high schools that are just 11-12. So the computer actually assigned these models to the schools originally in the calculations. And so we're presenting that to you because when the decision was made to override that and use just an elementary middle school model only, it then used only elementary middle school data and ignored all high school data to get a grade. And it's important that we all understand that because going forward, we have more configurations to bring before you. It's the combined model that's the issue. And so later, in a little bit, we're going to be asking you how you want us to calculate 12-13 grades and which plausible outcomes do you want us to use for combined elementary, middle, and high schools. And it's really a matter of what data do you want us to use.
And this is about 11-12 decision.
But right now, we're talking about 11-12, and these 4 schools
So what do you
that we're
say?
bringing to you that went from either a no grade assigned or went down to they all went down to Fs,
Michelle, you have some
or
information
from a
on
D
that
to an
appeal?
F. And so now, Michelle, it is okay if you talk about the appeal process. And while Thank you. It's very difficult to understand. I know it is. It's just complicated. Yes, Sarah.
More essentially, don't need the appeal and go back up these 4 schools, but we legally have an obligation to open up for any school that would want to question.
My purpose in bringing this to you was not to open up any appeals at all.
But aren't we kind of doing that?
I'm just asking,
That was mine about 10 minutes ago. I think on 11, 12, we can make a motion and move on it and then go to the next questions. We're gonna,
That was a concern, legal concern I had, is the same thing, sir, because I know we're saying the words hold harmless, but what we really did in that last vote was basically did nothing. By virtue of doing nothing, they retained the grade, the higher grade, which
Right.
works out in their favor.
and if you're wanting to go ahead and proceed with that, that's okay. Tony, you had your hand up a little bit ago.
Yeah, really, to me, this all really boils down to the fact that these schools are being penalized because we did not create a configuration model that fits their school. I mean, that's the bottom line. And that's no fault of theirs. That's maybe our lack of foresight that we knew these schools existed out there, that we didn't have an appropriate model for them. So that we would now come and, where there's an obvious variance and say, well, that's your fault. No, it's our fault. And these schools should be permitted to take advantage of, at least get the benefit of the doubt for the fact that we didn't account for their configuration. It's not an advantage. What it is they've suffered a disadvantage that I think we have an opportunity to easily correct here. And it's not even just a matter of 11, 12, it's 12, 13, and all the other schools are going to fit this configuration going forward. Now, what we know we have is board-approved formulas for these extra grades that already exist, the data already exists. It's just a matter of combining these models and putting out a new grade. And that just clearly, I don't know why we wouldn't do that. If we have all the data, it's clear what happened here. Why not assess them on as many data points and areas as possible?
Michelle?
Oh, sorry, Brad.
Can we do what Tony just said without opening up Pandora's box? I mean, does it create a situation where if we say, well, in this instance, we're going to combine all the data we have available to achieve the most favorable outcome, does that then cause all the other schools to say, but wait a minute, we got more data, why don't you combine this data? I don't disagree with the point. I'm just trying to worry about how much we're opening this up. This is already data that's been out for 2 years now.
And Brad, before Michelle answers, let me say that in my support of doing this, my motion would be to correct it for all of them, not just the ones that have appealed. Everyone that fit this configuration anomaly should go back and have their scores corrected.
What if it pushes it down, though?
That's tough, isn't it?
I don't know. I want to see. I want to see.
Oh, you have a...
On your paper that you have all that information. You have exactly what was auto-assigned and what their grade would have been. And you actually have then what the override. The department chose not to bring them all to you. We chose to bring you 4. We brought you 4 because those 4, in reviewing the data, actually their grades were lowered. So that's why we brought them forth to you. Your recommendation and what you do with this is up to you. I felt it was important to bring it to you because it's here in black and white. So I felt very strongly that you needed to see all this data and make a decision as to what you want to do. We highlighted those 4 because clearly, as Tony said, they went from one score down to another. The others did not. The others were improved.
For these 4 schools, one would go from an F to a D, and the other 3 would go from an F to no grade.
Correct.
Which is, to me, no grade is not an acceptable alternative. We're talking 11, 12. If there was harm, the harm has ended. They have had a new grade already. So it seems for consistency, we should have the 11, 12 grades stand as is, because any harm has ended, and then consider the recalculation for 12, 13 possibly. But I would make a motion to have the 11, 12 report cards stand as is for those 4 schools.
And perhaps, oh, pardon
Is
me.
there a second?
Second.
May I ask Michelle to offer her information so we're fully informed?
Just, and I think that it's responsive to both Brad and Andrea's questions or comments about consistency, as well as what has really been something everyone's concerned about, which is transparency, right? So, as Superintendent Ritz mentioned, two of the schools did appeal, and they specifically cited in their appeal that they thought that high school data should be part of their model, or that they should have a different model. And what I wanted to highlight, because I think that there seems to be a conception that the schools were unaware that they had, been graded on a non-combined model, that the schools weren't aware that they were graded on a middle school model. And as this department response from Will Krebs indicates, this is to the Hammond Academy of Science and Technology. Number 2, the school is graded with the elementary middle school model because of the small number of students that are included in the student's high school. What has, with Hammond, I gave everyone the packet of information. I don't want to give you even more detail, but it includes the grades that were served, and it shows, when you compare that to the graphic that I also provided you with, that since they weren't serving those grades, that they didn't have all those data points and they didn't have the sufficient data. And I'm going to show you one more quick appeal. I just have to scan down.
And was that appeal approved
So,
or denied?
as it shows in the first paragraph, it says that the recommendation was to approve in part and to deny in part the appeal. And then under the paragraph, the second criterion is, and it explains the rationale.
So it was denied to use the high school information?
Yes, and if I just can quickly mention this appeal and then explain why I'm mentioning them. Again, here you had a school that said, I'm not getting this data, you're applying a model. And again, the department was very forward in their response to the appeal. They weren't hiding the model they were using. They explained that we're using the middle school model because, and I'm referencing here the paragraph with second criterion. You can always tell when different people at the department draft the letters because this is formatted so differently. But it explains, it could not be graded under the high school 9th grade model only because the school has been in existence for 1 year. And also, again, was correctly graded under the middle school model. The reason I'm highlighting this is to show, one, the department was they didn't come to the board like this and as forward publicly say, look, we've got some problem schools and this is what we're doing. But they did give the schools the data in a forward way to let them know we're applying the middle school model and this is why. And also it was applied consistently to all of these schools. So since we're talking about the appeals, I just wanted to highlight this material that's kind of hit one paragraph within 12 pages.
In addition, I do know from my staff that we have heard from Hammond since the issues have been brought to the forefront regarding the models that were assigned. So they have, they've asked us to relook at things as well. But I chose to bring the issue to the board. Tony, did you have another question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wish I had known about this 2 years ago, because I think schools that do not clearly fit our rubric should be dealt with independently and not just try to force them into something that clearly doesn't fit their configuration. And the fact of the matter is, it's not remedied by the fact that there's another year of grades, because what we're talking about are basically failing schools, and it puts them 1 year closer to takeover where maybe they wouldn't be there because of this.
So we have a motion on the table to keep the grades as they were in 11-12 using the elementary middle school model override. And we have a second, and we're still in discussion. Is there any more discussion?
Call the question.
I will call for the vote. Laura?
Yes.
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 Nope.
Yeah.
Yes.
Abstain. Okay, now to 2012-13. If you would go back to the plausible alternative combined model options page. And Debbie, is there anything else you need to further present to us regarding decisions that we...
No, I don't have anything else to present, but I think I will lurk for additional questions.
So going forward, we have a calculation model. Our calculation software has many plausible alternatives for us. And you have some of them right there. 2 of them are in the rule. Hands down, they happen. Okay? But we also have, it will also produce for us combined models, as you see there. All of those models of which are in rule separately for high schools. So now the decision going forth is, do we apply these plausible models, or do we stay with the elementary middle school model for combined schools that, stick with one model or the other if it's not addressed in rule? Did I say that right, Debbie? Okay. Tony?
I move to apply a combined model calculation to the 2012-2013 grade calculations.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion.
A question, just to clarify, is that bullet point 3, what we're talking about on, when you say combine, you're looking at the documents, the 3 we're going to combine using any possible pairing?
Yeah, any possible pairing.
And I'm
that
assuming,
fits.
I just want clarity on the motion. The assumption, because I think I'm totally with you, is that whatever calculates the higher grade, that's what would be awarded, or no?
I'm not into figuring out the impact on the grades, just if it's EMS in 9-10, then EMS in 9-10, if that's what fits appropriately.
Okay.
If that means you're,
I just want to make sure.
And that's not to say, Debbie, correct me if I'm wrong, that's not to say we may not come back to you with other configurations that may not fit.
Correct. Actually, we have done some analysis of some 2013 2013 schools that do have these unusual grade configurations. Michelle actually has a spreadsheet of those, if that's helpful to review what schools we're actually talking about.
And I am committed, as the superintendent, to always bringing things back to you for accountability that do not fit the rule in which we've written to have decisions made. Yes.
Is there a reason why we wouldn't give multiple grades to schools with elementary, middle, and high schools? Why would we not award an elementary school grade, a middle school grade, and a high school grade? Now, I understand that if it's just a 9-10, we do have a different animal, but
We talked
Right,
about
Debbie, can you address that?
Certainly, the rule actually states that each school will have one unique grade. So what we're actually doing when we're calculating that one unique grade per school is looking at the different elements underneath, the elementary middle school component, the high school component, assigning scores for each of those, and then doing a weighted average to calculate the final overall grade. And I do believe that also persists in HEA 1427 as well.
Yeah, Debbie, if you could speak. We have a motion on the table, okay, to use combined models to calculate for 12-13. So tell me what this is giving us.
Okay, certainly. Let me get a copy of it. Sure. I start off with what we did for the data poll. So IDEA has been working with Michelle to pull a list of schools IDOE has been working with Michelle and Claire to pull a list of schools that actually have unusual grade configurations or change in configurations between 11-12 and 12-13 that would flag us as a concern for further review. So this is a list of the schools that, again, we have identified as either having partial high school data as a combined school, or has had a grade span change between 11-12 and 12-13 that will now result in a partial data situation. So I'll let Michelle speak.
So this is a version of the table that you all received yesterday at about 4 p.m. We forwarded to you the data on the schools that were going to be on this part of the agenda. We apologize, everyone was working hard, but we got it from the department. And basically, after I received that yesterday afternoon, I added that rightmost column that says why unusual grade span matters. And that's a very, very short summary of what Debbie has been explaining. But, you know, this school would typically fall under, and for most, you know, normally fall under the combined school model, but because of the grade configuration, you only have 1 of 4 data points, or 2 of 4, or 3 of 4, or whatever, right? And so this gives you hopefully a visual and a real understanding of, you know, in 1 year, this is the number of schools whose data profile, that's the terminology I'm using at least, doesn't really align with what the way that the rule was written. They're the outlier schools that that fall on the margins. And it isn't simply that they all fall on the margins the same way. As the color coding indicates, they all have different levels of data. So the blue indicates that these are the schools that have a high grade of grade 9. So at most, you would have some Algebra 1 ECA data, but not for anyone who takes the Algebra 1 ECA in grade 10 or later. If they're in the purple, then you are going to have your English 10 and Algebra 1 ECA data, but you're not going to have your grad rate data or your college and career readiness indicators. And I think that many schools, Debbie runs the data all the time, and I'll always defer to her expertise on this, but my general impression from looking at these is usually your grad rate and college and career readiness indicators bring up the grades. So when you're limited to only having the ECA data, you're arguably at a disadvantage compared to the schools that have the entire profile of data. The green schools go up to grade all the way up to grade 11. On this, I went ahead and included the schools just so that it would be consistent with the document that you received yesterday afternoon. But the royal blue schools, they were flagged because of the grade configuration, but they do fall neatly within the rule. So those are good to go. They get a thumbs up. They have the full data profile. They span 9 to 12, and they've had grade 12 for 2 years, which means we can calculate grad rate. If you're not familiar with grad rate, under the statute, we actually don't calculate grad rate until October, so we always do grad rate a year in arrears. So you have to, if you're a school that just had 12th grade for the first time in 12-13, we can't calculate a grad rate for you right now. We'll be able to calculate that grad rate next year at this time. And then the schools that are red and yellow, that red, you'll notice they only went up to grade 11 last year, even though by last year I mean for 11-12, even though their 12-13 grade span configuration goes all the way up to 12, last year they only went up to 11. So there are schools that would lack grad rate, even if we would be able to give them college and career readiness indicators.
Michelle, I asked you a question. When I started to look at this and both of you, looking at this all the time, how the rules were applied last year start to become pretty clear. You had these unique situations, they made good decisions, they applied a new rule, and we moved on. Are there any things we learned from last year that should definitely change, or should we just apply the same system? Because when I start seeing some of this, I'm seeing the wisdom of what was done last year.
Debbie works with.
After everything was written and said.
Debbie works with the data.
Are there any clear learnings that we can make it better before we get board policy?
Certainly.
Go ahead, Louise.
And I think when we take a step back and look at this as an accountability system, we really want to consider everything the school has done or has failed to do. So when we're ignoring complete data sets because we don't have a full data set, I'm not certain that that's an optimal solution. So while it was consistently applied last year that we should just use elementary, middle school,
So this in junior, senior, you want to somehow put in the calculation that elderly ECA.
correct. I think that that is definitely, again, the most optimal solution that we're using all data. Actually, the computer program was written in such a way that it does this automatically. As we went through this process and we actually reran 2012 grades and just removed these overrides, it automatically calculates these grades with any possible combination of high school model and elementary model.
Michelle, you did this work with them, because you kind of see that, you did it on mine, and that you do it very easily this way, and you do it
Well, being a lawyer, always try to limit myself to legal questions, and I consider that a policy question, but I will note from comments from the field and working in education for a little while, there is that concern about when you get the high school model applied to you and you don't have the full data profile, many of those schools feel like they wind up with a grade. They feel that as though they're at a disadvantage compared to other high schools because college and career readiness and grad rate tends to bring those grades up. So that's where the policy for you all lies.
So let me clarify, that's not what we're suggesting. In fact, we're suggesting that they use the 2 partial data points that have already been approved in your other high school models. So what Michelle said, yes, if you just did what they had the elementary and you applied the whole high school model, you are so correct. You would be dinged for all kinds of things because you didn't have the grades. You didn't have 11 and 12 grades, for instance. But that's not those are not the plausible pieces we're proposing to you today. And so Debbie, the list that you've given out to us, my
Yes.
question is, all of these unusual configurations of schools, would they be captured within a combined model? And if not, if the computer doesn't capture them, we would bring them back to this board.
I think that's very advisable. I don't feel that every one of these will actually be assessed under a combined model. I believe the first one on the first page, Indiana Math and Science Academy North, you will notice that they changed their grade span from kindergarten through 8th to kindergarten through 9th. Again, what that means for a combined model is that they would actually use elementary, middle school, and high school feeder. If we went that route, we still would not have high school feeder data because they have not had 9th grade for 2 years, which is required for high school feeder to be able to.
The program is set up to do that and recognize that.
Correct.
Okay.
We will definitely be manually reviewing every school on this list to make sure that the outcome is as expected, that the appropriate accountability model was selected automatically that we would expect to see.
A nuance of this, though, if you did it combined, and you're in 9th and 10th grade, I think you realize that the grad rate and the college career ready tend to be helpful, probably disproportionately to ECA stuff.
Actually, if you'll,
No?
I'm sorry, if you'll refer to the sheet that has all of the outcomes after running this, you'll notice that many of the grades actually remain the same for 2012, whether we applied the overrides.
That was way
No.
Right, so although we have seen some schools, obviously their grades did go up when the override was applied and they were assessed as elementary, middle school. We've identified that we feel some schools were actually harmed with the override, and many schools actually remained the same.
Is that appealable if you feel like it's disproportionately affected? Is that appealable?
I believe we have to outline the appeal criteria, so I'm not certain that I'm qualified to answer that question.
All right, so we have a motion on the table
Oh.
to calculate the 2012-13 grades using the
what you all just voted on is not to use that combined school model that's provided in the rule. You have voted to go outside the rule to address these outlier school scenarios and create some additional hybrid models that are combined. It's a term of art. The combined school model really specifically references, and I know we were trying to clear, I just want everyone to be clear on what we voted on, and so that.
Motion clear?
Yes, I
Yeah.
think I put options in there.
Okay.
In the motion.
And it is clear, it was just for the 2012, 2013
Yes,
data.
yes, and I said that as well.
Okay.
Yes,
So does everybody know,
okay, thank you.
know,
Thank you, Debbie. Yes, Troy.
How soon will schools know their grade?
Debbie.
Now that you have that guidance, what's the timeline?
Preliminarily, know their grade.
Right.
Right. I do want to note that before we release final preliminary grades, we will need final I-STEP grades or scores. At this point, we're still waiting on rescores for I-STEP. We will be moving forward with any calculations on preliminary I-STEP scores.
So remember, the window just ended September 30th. So now we have all that data, and now we have to look at those appeals from the school and parents, so to speak, and then we'll be moving forward with that. So do we have an estimated time, do you think, Debbie?
To actually calculate the data is fairly quick. We could probably calculate the data in a few days. My concern is more along the side of quality assurance and doing review. Since this is only year 2 of calculating A through F, we don't have an established baseline of what to expect, any changes in grades, how many schools will actually change grades, etc. What's acceptable if a school changes 3-letter grades over the course of the year, how in-depth do we actually need to look at that school, that school's data. So my concern is more on the quality side of this and not necessarily on the calculation side. Obviously, we've spent a lot of time rerunning calculations, so we're very familiar with how to run the calculations. That part can run very quickly. I am more concerned with the quality side of this and getting to that comfort level of knowing that the data that we have calculated is what we've expected to see.
Reasonably, are you thinking Thanksgiving?
Yes. Before.
Before.
Well before.
Thank you, Debbie.
No problem.
All right. The next item, the resolution of Gary Community School Corporation and Edison Shared Learning Services Agreement. Bernice, you want to give an update? Do we see? Oh, come forward. I guess we have representatives from Gary and from Edison. Thank you. It's our understanding you have a tentative agreement.
Yes, we do.
Great.
That's right. Thank you, Superintendent. I'm Sarah Reardon on behalf of Edison, and I think we finalized some terms last night. I have an agreement that my client's ready to sign, so.
And good afternoon, Tracy Coleman with the Gary Community School Corporation. We do have a tentative agreement, but since there is pending litigation, we will be communicating with Superintendent Ritz because this matter does involve active litigation. Thank you.
So that you both are signing that agreement?
It's tentative, but we look to have it ratified soon. And once again, because this is a matter which involves pending litigation, there are numerous issues that we have to resolve completely, but we're very close to finalizing everything.
Go ahead, Bernice.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask, when do you expect to have it signed?
We hope to hopefully have an agreement finalized before the end of this month, very quickly though, hopefully within the next week or so.
I would just sort of take issue with that. We're ready to sign what we have, the terms that we negotiated as of last night. I don't think there's anything outstanding. I have a red line copy and a final copy for signature that I'll give to Tracy today. I think we're done. Our mediator basically said today that he considers his role to be over and that he's completed his work, and as of last night, he reported to me that we had a deal, and I think we do. So we're ready to sign.
And once again, with paper, you have to look at every word, every detail.
So you're just reviewing it?
Yes.
So you're reviewing it in light of having had litigation? Okay, gotcha.
Thank you.
I misunderstood. Tony.
I just want to state that I think it's important to keep at the forefront that what we're doing here with the shared services agreement is trying to provide a means for the kids that are presently at Roosevelt to have the essential services they need. Under our statutory authority, we're essentially looking at transportation and facility maintenance. Now, all these other issues that may have come up regarding your all personal lawsuits against each other, that's not necessarily part of shared services. So let's not combine those. If you all don't settle your case, that's of no real concern to me and probably not the board. But we have to have a central agreement as it relates to transportation and facilities at Roosevelt High School. So let's
Yes,
not
sir.
hold up shared services thinking that we need some kind of universal settlement on all these issues. That's
Yes, sir.
not
And
what we're after.
I think that's understood, that if you were to see the terms of the agreement that we're prepared to sign, it essentially does deal with exactly those services, the use of the facilities, maintenance of the facilities, transportation, special education, and so on and so forth. So that's really the general topic of it.
And on behalf of the Gary Community School Corporation, the Gary Community School Corporation did not initiate any type of litigation. It was initiated by Edison Learning. But once it became into the adversarial process, which we were looking to collaborate, we had to address an adversarial process that was not initiated by us. Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
I'm sorry, I was just back to signature of this document. So we have, it looks like from the work of the mediator and the work that you
Yes.
two have done together, Sarah, does this represent, the document you have, does it represent what was agreed upon last night when you all met or spoke?
Yes, we've met in person for 3 day-long sessions, and then the rest of our work has primarily been electronically or by telephone. Mr. Sullivan, our mediator, sent this document to me last night, actually this morning, which contains I asked him specifically to put all the changes in the document so that it came from him. And so I'll give that to Tracy now. I know it was copied to her this morning also, but I don't know that she's had an opportunity to review it. And then this, I simply accepted all of the changes in that document and put affixed signature lines for all of our clients. So I'll give that to her now. And it can be signed in counterparts, so you can have your folks review and sign, and I can do that separately and have 2 documents. Would it be the board's wish that we present you with a copy of the settlement agreement?
I requested that. In fact, I've already communicated with the board that I would, this item here, depending on whether the board was going to do something, and I would be presenting them with your agreement. We're hoping to get that.
And I would like to thank Superintendent Ritz through this process. Previously, we did not have the benefit of an independent party as IPS did with their process. And so we sincerely appreciate Superintendent Ritz taking the initiative to obtain a mediator to help us sit down, which was a benefit that Gary Community School Corporation was not given, but which IPS did. And so we have worked diligently throughout this process, and we thank you for your help with that.
Well, I think the mediator certainly has been very productive, and I know getting the parties together and getting things all taken care of. So I'm hoping to see that document, because I do plan to send it to the board. And with that, do we have any more questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your attention to this.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is electronic participation in meetings, and I believe that you have something to present. You guys, I guess we all have a copy. Do I hear a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Second. Any more discussion about the electronic participation in meetings?
My only concern that I have about doing it for board meetings and official public meeting here is that our representation is very important to be here. I think the use of the electronic to facilitate in committee meetings, or if you wanted to have small group sessions, I think that would be very appropriate use of, but I really would avoid, if we could at all costs, not being present on days like today.
Michelle, do you have a comment?
Well, and we attempted to reflect that preference in the document. The statutory requirement for participation is only 1/3 of the members, and rather than only going with 1/3 of the board members, we put the number 7 in.
Making sure we had a quorum here.
Making sure that there would be a full quorum, and to make electronic participation to be the exception rather than the norm.
Go ahead and take the vote.
Yes.
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 Sarah Bryan? Yes. Fred Oliver?
Yes.
Tony Walker?
Yes.
TJ Watt?
Yes.
Terry Wicker? Yes. Superintendent Rick?
Yes. Now we're back to discussion. We have the Office of Management and Budget Student Instructional Expenditure Report that is due to the board each year. I think we have someone from OMB that is present. And you already received the report, so do you have questions? He's available if you have questions. You didn't really have a presentation, you just were here.
Exactly.
And your name?
My name is Chad Timmerman with the OMB. Report is what it sounds. Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can go home. I know. No. Yeah, oh my goodness. The next item on the agenda is HEA 1005, Remediation Guidelines Update. Danielle Shockey, Deputy Superintendent. Oh, I'm so sorry. I missed one already. Thank you. Actually, I missed it because it doesn't have a letter by it. Presentation models for ERB and IDOE. Risa?
I'm not sure where Risa is, but I'm the chairman of ERB.
Okay. Well, actually, Risa gave a written report, so I'm not sure she needed to be here, but go right ahead.
Okay. My name's Pat Mapes. I'm the chairman of ERB, Education Employment Relations Board. I believe the board asked us to come today to kind of tell you a little bit about what my agency does. Our charge statutorily is to provide a harmonious and cooperative relationship between public school teachers and the school corporations that they serve. I want it to be known, ERB is not a compliance agency, but what we do is during the bargaining season, which began August 1st and ran through September 30th, school corporations and their exclusive representatives try to settle their contracts. When they can't do that, we train mediators and fact finders, and the next step after they can't get a contract is we move them to impasse, assign a mediator who goes in and has 30 days to try to help them get an agreement. If they cannot get an agreement at the end of those 30 days, they exchange last best offers, and then at that point they're in a fact-finding stage. And we assign a fact finder with a financial consultant to go in, hold a public hearing. Both sides defend their last best offers, and then the fact finder will select a contract for that school district. Other issues that is handled in our agency is we decide unfair practice cases. We also identify who the exclusive representatives would be in school districts and hold elections and determine the bargaining units. We have a research division. We are currently working with IU Business Research to collect data through the gateway system, so we will know exactly contract ranges, benefits, and be able to make transparency that the public will be able to see that for all the school corporations in the state. And then, of course, we provide training to different groups, whether it be school boards, exclusive representatives. We go to the universities for teacher prep programs to explain the collective bargaining process. One of the things that the new law did bring about that is very important that all the school districts are feeling an impact from is that there is no collective bargaining agreement that can be reached that puts a school corporation into deficit financing. And that deficit financing is looking at the current school year general fund certification from the Department of Education. And the department each year gives an estimate in August, before August 1 for the school districts to utilize, and then after count day we'll come back with what the actual DOE certifications will be. Just so you know, currently in this bargaining season we have 243 school corporations who have been bargaining. We have about 164 of those contracts that are settled. Unfortunately, only about 142 of those agreements have made it to our office so far, so we do have a lot of work of tracking some of those down. And then we do know there are school board meetings for the next few days this week, beginning of next week, where ratification will take place. But we have already started to assign mediators and moved corporations in impasse that have told us they cannot get an agreement. As far as the compensation models, which are a part of a collective bargaining agreement, contracts in the compensation model under 2028-9-1, there are 4 factors that are going to be considered of how you can get a raise. And that's going to be evaluation, experience in education, instructional leadership roles, and meeting the academic needs of students in that school corporation. It's important to realize that now a teacher who is rated ineffective or improvement necessary may not receive any raise or increment for the following year. That teacher's contract is continued, and all the compliance of those compensation model, it's for the department to bring to this body of the state board to determine what action will take place as far as compliance with the compensation models. I do have my general counsel, Sarah Cudahy, here with us today. I would also like to note that Dr. Marlon Creasy and Dr. Dennis Brooks are consultants who worked for ERB, and we've looked at a lot of contracts over the last 2 years. And it's painful when you move into a new law and a new process, and there are a lot of mistakes that have been made, whether it be how they've developed the compensation models or what they have in their contract. And our goal is, with the Practitioner's Guide to Collective Bargaining and with training from our agency, that we help both sides get this correct. And there's going to be mistakes made, as I said, along the way, and I think that was reported in the report you got from the department of these mistakes. They only used one factor. There's no great definitions. They didn't have any verbiage in their contract that said only people rated effective and highly effective qualify for the raises. We'll clean those up as people go through this, because the other side of a contract today is a contract cannot extend past the biennium. So a contract is either going to be a 1-year contract or a 2-year contract, because the financial biennium is a 2-year process. So you're almost always bargaining. And I know sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad, but the bottom line is your fundings are based on students, and the ADM dollars that you just heard about, that's going to change each year about how much money you have available. And we do want these schools to make certain that they're using good financial decisions and they don't get into deficit financing and have to get to the point where they're cutting programs and cutting things that are needed in order to operate in their local school districts.
And as indicated in Renee's report from the Department of Education, we're going to give you another report by November 15th talking about this year's contracts. And her staff went through and gathered you more specific information regarding the areas of concern, perhaps in compensation models. And we are working with ERB to make sure that we are moving forward on making sure that compensation models are in compliance. Final report, though, we're not going to wait until the end of the school year to give that to you. We're going to give that to you in the February meeting. We see no need to wait. All bargaining will be finished. Actually, all bargaining has to be concluded by what date? Final bargaining?
Well, if everything's clean,
yeah,
we would hope that would be December 31st.
Correct.
But if unfair labor practices or other things would come up during that process, it can be extended.
But for the most part, we'll be ready to give you a full report in February, and would like that to be our usual time when we do that, even though we have till July. We don't see any need to be waiting. First of all, July's too late. The bargaining window starts at August 1 again. So to be addressing anything at that late date is a little too late. Brad?
I wanted to ask a question. When I first came on, my first meeting was July 19th, there was a real discussion at that time. Part of the reason you're here came out of that discussion about the flexibility issued by the department around RISE 2.5. And I'm hearing from teachers back in my area that one of the concerns they have is that their districts are interpreting RISE 2.5, even though the board didn't issue it, and it's actually reducing for the teachers and really in the first 2 categories down to the same level. Does that have a fiscal impact based on the bargain compensation models locally? Can it hurt a teacher who would have otherwise had that count for more? Does ERB even take a position on whether a RISE 2.5 is legitimate, since it never came out of this group?
Well, the evaluation as far as the compensation model just informs the compensation model of who's in. And at that point in time, then their rating, based on how much emphasis they put on evaluation, will determine how much money out of that pot is distributed to the people who qualify. So obviously, if the number of people that you have in the pot is 100, and then you change your evaluation system and you let 125 in, the distribution of money is going to go down per individual. But it's hard to say on a case-by-case basis of who did that and who didn't, and at what time did they make those types of changes, whether or not they discussed that and made the proper procedure changes in order for them to do it as well.
And I don't want to over just today. I just wanted to ask if there's any thought of us revisiting that, because I don't know that we ever, since I've been here since July 19th, I don't think it's ever come back up, whether or not, my understanding statutorily is the board has to authorize that, and I'm just somewhat concerned that we've not attended back to that. So I will leave that.
That is the board's, that's the board's responsibility.
That's been one interpretation of that,
But
yes. One interpretation. Thank you very much, Pat.
Okay.
Thank you.
what's our interpretation?
Michelle, or actually James prepared a legal memo regarding that, and bring that up.
I don't know if this is the property you're talking about.
Well,
Needs a question.
it's not on the agenda today.
But
It's the NRCOE staff.
it's associated with that agenda item.
It's not, my preference as the chair is that we just continue our agenda items. We have a great many things to address. So we're down to HEA 1005, remediation guidelines update. Danielle. I'm going to call everybody Michelle today. Danielle Shockey.
I believe you received what we called an HE 1005 update dated yesterday, as well as a list of members of pilot schools in the AccuPacer pilot who attended a training recently, so you can see who attended and what their status is in the pilot. I guess just the important things to note, I really hadn't intended anything different other than just to let you read the update. So I would obviously answer any questions you may have, but just note we're meeting, and when I say we, I think it's important to note it's Department of Workforce Development, Education Roundtable, and the Commission for Higher Education are meeting on the dates noted there. However, the date for the 4th is actually the 3rd. So it's tomorrow, November 7th, December 5th, January 2nd, February 6th, and March 6th, already scheduled out and on everyone's calendars. Our reason for meeting tomorrow is going to be in light of Representative Baining's document that I believe you also received. He sent to all of you with regards to his request that you would consider reopening the dialogue on the interim guidance to add an additional cohort group of students for testing for AccuPlacer pilot. We met, as noted on this timeline, on September 30th with Representative Baining and Representative Clare and members of the Department of Education, and we all agree that we want to look at what other additional students might be needed to be in this pilot, and we would be making recommendations for that to start in January in the schools across the state. So after we meet tomorrow in a shared group, we will go ahead with Representative Baining's recommendation to bring you something back in November for a formal recommendation.
We got the list of schools, and I'm wondering, those are the schools involved this year in the pilot. How many were involved last year in the pilot, and is that number grown? Because my concern, I go back to, I'm a broken record on certain things, but the more kids we can get remediated, the sooner we get kids remediated, it helps everybody out, certainly helps those students out. So I'm wondering, how that pilot didn't look very big.
Mm-hmm. And
I'm hoping the pilot's huge.
Well, actually,
so
what will happen is if we extend the cohort group of students who we offer the test to, essentially the pilot group could grow to every school in the state of Indiana come second semester, if you think about an identified group of students. So right now, that list was based on the schools that want to be a part of the pilot. They identified themselves last March because of multiple things, i.e. ISTEP windows being extended, schools extending their ECA windows because of the ISTEP window. They didn't actually give their diagnostic pilot till this fall. So those are all the schools in the pilot. So that it was kind of an extension from last spring to this fall.
So that hasn't really grown from last year to
Correct. So the first extension will be after we make this recommendation coming forth.
Because, and then, my follow-up to that is making sure, whether this is a statement or a question, how are we going to make sure we can get as many people in this as possible? Because
Correct.
every child needs this opportunity?
I think and it's an interesting group of students. I want to make sure everybody's aware of this. This is a group of students that we want to add that did not fail their ECAs, but in fact have a PSAT score that's been recognized by Ivy Tech and such groups as, these are the groups of students who graduate with a Core 40 diploma, but they're ending up in remediation courses. So they kind of done statistics on, well, these cut scores, these students are the kind we're seeing remediation. So we need to be fiscally responsible in our decision making, because we also need to look at, if we take this PSAT score, how many students does that impact? Is that 10,000 students? Is that 20,000 students? Is that 7,000 students? So we need to look at our budget with remediation and testing to say, okay, so we're going to kind of make some layered recommendations to say, okay, we can capture this group of students and this would be the cost. We could capture these two groups of students and this would be the cost. So that's what this committee will wrestle with tomorrow, and then we'll bring you forth recommendations.
So what we're really doing is expanding the pilot, so to speak, and gathering the same kind of data. And we're working with CHE and DWD also within this process as well. And so we all have things that we need to gather and do throughout the whole process as well for remediation purposes. Thank you, Carrie. Yes, David?
So your intent is to come back at the November meeting with an action item?
Correct.
Yes.
An action item that would, as I understood Representative Baining's request, that would amend the interim guidance with regard not so much to the study. I think we all agree there's lots of things to study, but the actual cohorts is what I'm calling them, groups of students that we want to add to the additional testing.
And that's going to be your recommendation?
To add additional students, yes.
In November?
Yes.
Reason why you're not making the recommendation now is because it's not under action item?
No. Just because honestly, it came to the round table last Wednesday. We met with Representative Baining and Claire on the 30th, which I believe was Monday. His letter came yesterday. So we all kind of came to an agreement that we would be willing to look at adding additional cohort groups of students as recently as Monday. So that's really why. And also, frankly, we need to get with College Board to determine their capabilities of basically adding cohorts all across the state, because there was some training. There was a training that took place with the current pilot schools this September for what they're using. So we need to extend that, obviously, a lot broader.
Thanks.
You're welcome. All right, the next item is standards review process update related to assessments. And so you have before you for a third time the standards review timeline. I sent it out to you, so I want to have further dialogue with this and talk about the assessment process as well. And talk to you about the previous administration and the transition that was already planned to go to college and career assessments, and get input from you on how that was planning to be rolled out, and the plan going forward. So as you can see here, and I think we distributed to you also the committee members' names that are going to serve on the actual committees for language arts and math. In addition to those names that you have there, we have two more groups that we're going to be having along with this process. One is an advisory technical team, basically, to make sure that the process is working well. We've got parents on that group. We've got a lot of different constituencies on that group to kind of go alongside. And then we've contacted Teresa Lubbers at the Commission for Higher Education, and we are forming a college and career ready higher education panel. And the purpose for this panel is to assure, as revisions are suggested or made along the way, that they will be deemed college and career ready, so that we can simultaneously do this process, so that when it comes to you, hopefully in April, we'll already have got everything taken care of. So the committee members you have, and then we're doing two advisory.